welcome back. I am so honored to have Daniel Giamario here with us today. Hi, Daniel. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure being here. It's good to see you, Beth.
I've been following Daniel's work, I think for what is it? What did I say? About 7, 8, 9 years, something like that. I followed it back when it was called the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School.
Mhm.
And now it is called TOTAMS. And Daniel Giamario is the founder of the Turning of the Ages Mystery School and the creator of the TOTAMS Astrology Paradigm, also known as the Giamario approach, previously known as Shamanic Astrology Paradigm. He joined together an academic background in comparative philosophy and spirituality with teaching meditation in 2 worldwide organizations in the 1970s and extensive world travel throughout his life. Totems astrology has evolved a rich blend of psychological, mythological, spiritual, and shamanic elements specifically designed to assist in the unfoldment of the individual's life purpose and in navigating this pivotal point in the turning of the ages. Daniel's passions are the growing of the Turning of the Ages Mystery School's body of knowledge, further evolution of the Totems Astrological Paradigm, and continued research to obtain answers to his lifelong question, who are we and what the hell happened?
Right.
If we could only answer that. Daniel, I've heard bits and pieces of your story over the years, but I really wanted to bring you on because I think this work that you're doing and astrology in general is so important to understand, where we are, what we're going through as a, collective here on Earth at this time, and also to talk about purpose, sacred work in the world. But I'm curious, how did you get on this path of astrology and doing your sacred work? Did you know when you were 7 years old you'd be doing this?
Not at age 7. However, there was a kind of a pivotal thing that happened when I was between 11 and 12, when I had one really clear desire at that point. I wanted to read every science fiction book in the library, and while I didn't end up I did that, by the way, but I didn't end up becoming a science fiction writer. But it did form the sort of imaginative foundation of the rest of my life. But I did not really have a sense of what my path would be until near the end of my first year of college. And I had the great fortune of being in the university in the late 60s, which was one of the time periods where we kicked the military off campus, we kicked the business corporations off campus, we got rid of sororities and fraternities, and it was really quite an awakening time. It was quite remarkable, and it was probably the last time period when a university could really be like that. And it was in my senior year, I met a woman who was an astrologer, and we were together for a while, and she taught me. So I was basically her apprentice for a long time. And then during that time period in the early 70s, I was part of at that time, kind of the renaissance of the astrological movement among young people at that time. And the mentor for a lot of us was a guy named Dane Rajar. And that actually ended up becoming what was known as transpersonal astrology. And what it was doing is that it was a kind of a counteraction against deterministic, that we don't have any control over it. It's all, but our approach was that his approach and our approach was that the purpose of astrology is to help to unfold the purpose of the soul. So it was much more about where the different streams of spiritual practices were happening at that time. So it was really part of an overall cultural revolution that was happening at that time. But that was mainly an Eastern or left brain approach. So I started to actually became quite done with that, I guess you could say. And so I needed to do something different. And that was when I got involved with a woman named Joan Halifax, who at that time was the head of the Ojai Foundation. And so basically she was doing Vision Quest. She'd just come out of her time period with Stan Groff. And so she was heavily into core shamanism. And so basically I was in a small group that went to high mountain valley of Mount Shasta and had a Vision Quest experience. And I nearly died. I mean, it was one of these death and rebirth kinds of things. The weather changed abruptly. I went into hypothermia, but it was a surrender thing on a major level, and it was during that time period within the context of the ceremonial of the vision quest, of where you separate yourself from your regular life. You do something pretty extreme, some fasting and I went to a very high mountain ridge, and some remarkable things happened. And it was that time that kind of the mountain and the sky and the stars uh, met me. We met each other, shall we say. And at that point, I had the sense that if I was going to continue to be an astrologer, it had to be something that connected with earth and sky, experiential, not just knowing stuff in your mind. And so therefore, I spent a lot of time all through the 80s experimenting with different vision quest approaches and taking groups out to Joshua Tree. I led groups to Mount Shasta every year in August, and started going to the stone circles of Scotland, and it all opened up at that time. That was even before the school first started, which wasn't until the early 2000s. But so, it was actually in the 1980s when I actually coined the expression, the turning of the ages, about an awareness of just how the different timelines are intersecting around now. Well, that's kind of how it all happened. So Rajar is forming the foundation of all of this for me philosophically. He had done the same thing. He had blended in Jungian psychology, Sri Aurobindo, theosophy. Later on, I became very much influenced by anthroposophy and the work of Rudolf Steiner. So these are a lot of the individuals that go into the foundation of our approach, the astrology, the philosophy, the spirituality of it. But it's all based upon the actual experience of a human being on the planet in connection with the sky and the land. So it's something that we require in our school, people who are certified in our approaches, to know the sky. So I mean, it's amazing how many astrologers don't know that. That they just only know it. Looking at the piece of paper and having some, intellectual knowledge of it. So all our techniques come from myself and other people that I've worked with over the years, and our experience of getting the transmissions directly.
Incredible. I love it. And I think that's what attracted me to follow this paradigm for so long, was that it did involve the actual sky. It wasn't just astrology. It's almost, like whenever I listen to something, it feels like it's real science, It's not, not to say, by the way, that esoteric is not any worse or better than, what people might call science, but it just made more sense. Also, your approach differs from what I understand about, understanding where we are right now, like in actual relationship, versus a lot of astrology is based on, a different location, right? Like, because the ages are turning. So can you explain that a little more? Because I think that's a big piece of what differentiates your paradigm from just maybe, yeah.
I understand your point. I mean, one of the things that I'm always surprised by is that although there are a lot of really good astrologers out there, they seldom place it within this larger context. About where are we in the greater cycles of history. You mentioned something about science. Much of what is called science today is scientism. So if you go back further in time, astrology was known as the highest of the lower mysteries. Now that kind of surprises people to hear me say that, but with the lower mysteries include everything, physics, chemistry, psychology, geology. I mean, it's literally everything. But it's the higher mysteries are things like what is the nature of grace? How does the actual experience of self-realization happen? How has self-love actually come about? Astrology can point you on a path toward that, but those are mysteries that are not covered by science. Okay, but originally astrology encompassed everything of the psychological, the physical, everything that we would call science was actually within it. Alchemy, for example. So as far as what your question about where are we in time, I mean, the turning of the ages, um, it wasn't actually in 19 till 1969 when a book came out called Hamlet's Mill, and that was the very first indication that there was some knowledge, which the ancients knew, that there would be a point where the equinoxes and the solstices would line up with the plane of the galaxy and the plane of the solar system. And when you know that, and when you know something about the sky, then you can see the greater calendrics. You can see basically the frame, the structure of we could call it a cosmic clock. And so now most people currently have been learning about what's called the precession of the equinoxes, which is the the largest cycle, which is based on the actual movement of our Earth and space and the sun and the moon, basically how the Earth is positioned in its orbital pattern and its the tilt of the axis, and it's the longest cycle that is possible for a human being to have a kinesthetic experience with from one lifetime to the next. And that's different numbers are given, but we can round it off and say 26,000 year cycle. However, it turns out that other systems, whether it's the Mayan four world approach or the Aztec or Toltec five world approach, or whether it's the Yuga system, which a book that I can just highly recommend. I've been pushing this guy's work since 2012. A book is called Yuga Shift that came out about 6 months ago. I saw this book Yuga Shift, and it's basically the Yuga cycles. It's a way of doing research of understanding that the Yuga system is exactly the same thing. It's based on the 26,000 year cycle, and in the approach there is that time, so-called linear progress, is not the way it works. It's cyclical. So you have rising and falling and rising and falling. And what this view is, and it would correspond also to the turning of the ages understanding of the precessional cycle, is that we're in the densest time. We're at the time of the most materialistic involution density of spirit into matter. And so what happens at that time are some very interesting things. Like you never get patriarchy, for example, except in the Kali Yuga, the one we're in now. For the greater portions of human history, it's matrilineal, right? And also the inversion, so that in Kali Yuga, to become, president or a leader, whether it's corporate or political or whatever, it's not based on spiritual initiation. It's based upon how much stuff you have or how big your army is. So it's a complete inversion. So that it's a disconnection from spirit and soul. Even modern science. I mean, I don't mean the alternative ones, but mainstream science still is trying to say that there's no free will, there's no soul, there's no spirit. That consciousness is just a product of the brain. Stuff like that. But of course, you in the world you're in, I mean, look at the name of your organization. I mean, anyone who's had psychedelic or alternate expanded states of awareness, no, that's not true. It begins with awareness, consciousness, and so where we're at right now is the deepest density. But rather than making that sound, oh, too bad we're in Kali Yuga, the densest time, where there's likely to be some kind of conflagration, and basically the world needs to be renewed. Well, those of us who are awake, through the spiritual will, we can choose to connect with great mystery, with spirit, with soul. In Sat Yuga, in a golden age, it's no big deal because everybody's got it. So it takes a certain spiritual will in order to access these things now, which includes the fact that people who have open hearts now, that's a big deal. To open your heart in Kali Yuga is a hugely more important than if you had it in Sat Yuga, because then everybody did. So Kali Yuga, this is not to be identified with Kali, the goddess. This is a different meaning of the word Kali, but it has more to do with the density, with what happens when the cycles are rising and falling and rising and falling, and then you have a point that happens all the time that you go into deep density. You know, I mean, we've had it. It's happened on this planet before. But I mean, that gives you a little taste of your
Yeah,
question.
no, it's great. Well, I wanted to talk about this because, I think there's a lot of people, and not the mainstream yet, but there's a lot of people that are aware of this that you're talking
Yeah,
about. I think there's more and more, especially, in the world that we kind of circulate in.
yeah.
And I'm wondering, how can people make sense out of being incarnated here during this time? And how does astrology help us navigate this, like making meaning and knowing that, like you
Hmm.
mentioned soul, which I talk about nonstop on this podcast, because that's, the center of everything. But how can people like work with, let's say, their own astrology
Yeah.
and the astrology of these times to better navigate it or be of service? And, is this important? We could just give up and say, there's a lot of people that say, oh, everything's just going to shit. Fuck it. There's that.
In both this astrological approach and in our school, if I had to narrow it down, there's two primary intentions. One is to, no matter what happens, if we know our life purpose, then it doesn't really matter. You know, so if you're able to connect to why you were born, then the outcomes are somewhat irrelevant. I'm often reminded of there's that statement that I think it was attributed to Saint Francis. He was out hoeing his garden, and someone walked up to him and he said, "What would you do if you knew that at sunset you would be shot?" And he said, "I would keep hoeing my garden." The same thing happens, you know, if someone has the dharma of being a parent, even if this whole thing is annihilated in a year, you still are going to be a parent. While plenty of other people who know they're not here with that dharma might choose rightfully that we just not a time to bring children in. You know, so it depends on your place on the wheel and what your life purpose is. The other intention is, and this is really following completely on the foundation of Rajar. In 1973, he created a document that we have on our website called Seed People. And basically, this is, we have no idea. He could see what was happening in the 2020s. He actually, not predicted, but he could see what was potentially coming. And he said that I have no idea. We don't know what may come, and it could be really, really challenging. But the most important thing is to become a seed person. And that means that you have learned as much as possible about what is great around what human beings have been up to this point. And you not as a specialist, but as a generalist. So you're able to be able to say, well, I can know something about geology, about medicine, about astronomy, about, basically you're not just specialized in one thing. And then you become a seed person for whatever comes next, because then those seeds are what then create the new, as we go forward into a new cycle during the ascent in different yugas. So that's our purpose really, is to both find seed people. I work with all kinds of people who are not necessarily part of our school, but it's always about, let's find out what your life purpose is, and then what can you do? Because often when you can assess what your life purpose is, that is not necessarily the path of least resistance. I mean, often the path of least resistance is you're just um, doing what has worked before, let's say,
Yeah.
or you're just
Get a
resting
job
on
that
your
you hate.
laurels,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
rather than choosing to risk going into new territory. And the chart is really great at giving the clues about what place on the wheel you came into the current life to be on. It also gives great clues as to who you were before. We have a whole concept of lineage, which I know you've connected into some of this material. That the view here, and this is kind of mind blowing, Beth, is that I've never had one person in 50 years ever push back on me with this. I'll say, when you're born, you're not a blank slate. There's going to be attitudes and habits and addictions and expectations and a skill set that you come into the life with. Um, to this day, still in more mainstream work, they basically say that you're a blank slate, which is in fact not. I mean, no one has pushed back on that. I think anybody who has children know that they have a certain essence that no matter what you try to do to them or have them be, that they're going to actually be unique.
Wow. I'm curious because I do get a lot of clients coming to me that are making that transition into their life purpose. They've had some kind of a awakening or breakdown, initiation. Maybe it's psychedelic, maybe it's not.
Yeah,
Usually it's a combination of all of the above. And they get
yeah,
to, usually by the way, in midlife, right? 35 through 55, where people come in and they say, I can't do it anymore and I need to go for this. But I'm wondering, what are your views on why so many people either struggle to know their life purpose or follow it? Like they might be, they might feel something that they want to do, but then, 20, 30, 40 years they're spent doing something else. But then there's the people that come to me saying, I don't know anything about my purpose. And it's sometimes kind of shocking to be, in your 50s and not even have a sense of purpose.
yeah. I think the main reasons are, number one, cultural conditioning. So basically, individuals want to do what others are doing or what the culture is saying you should be doing. The other can be simply lack of education, that there are other alternatives. So a lot of times in our when I do a session for someone or in our school, it's like, look, here's the full spectrum of possibilities. And yeah, I understand why you came into the life with the parents you had and the culture you were born into that made you believe as a man or a woman you're supposed to be this way or that way. But actually, this shows here that your investigatory project is to check out this other place on the wheel. So basically to be able to have the permission, really. I mean, a lot of times, I mean, I'm really fortunate, Beth, in that a great deal of the people I work with are already either awake or they want to be. And so therefore they're open to hearing this kind of information. I mean, that was really the whole thing about us in the late 60s. We were rebelling against, contrary to the black and white reality of the silent generation, and we're actually overturning the consensus reality at that time. But it's so when generations rise and fall, it's rather amazing how once again a cultural or a consensus reality will take hold again, and so that it becomes difficult for people to have access to their individuality, to their uniqueness. So cultural but also the third factor is depending on what cycle you're in, because there's different ways that you can reach the edge. And in our school, we have Plutonian ways of doing it, Neptunian ways of doing it, Uranian ways of doing it, Saturn ways of doing it. These all represent different initiatory processes that are designed to take you to a point where you reassess. Like if you mentioned 35 to 55, actually, we can narrow that down to particularly the time period between 40 and 45. Where there's things that happen in those years that back in the 80s, the astrologers that I was working with at that point coined the expression, the astrological cycles of the midlife crisis. And so that would involve primarily Neptunian and Uranian kinds of things, and very often Pluto. So Neptune is more like, I don't know who I am anymore. And so therefore the advice there is, well, that's the purpose of this. It's okay not to know. This is like a vision quest time, a time to throw it up in the air in order to get guidance that's not a middle world kind of thing. A lot of people that are like high producing, achievement oriented types, they get to one of those cycles and it's like, what's going on here? My life's not working anymore. And the stories of the CEO that goes into the board meeting and says, I don't know why I'm here anymore. I'm going on a world cruise and I'm not taking my cell phone. What? How? Well, unfortunately, there's not too many of them that will do that. But still, that's what is the suggestion at that time period. Then you have Plutonian ones. And Plutonian ones are where conditions become so chaotic, irrational, beyond your control that the rational mind cannot figure it out. I mean, it's basically a surrender thing, and a Plutonian cycles are like when it's the conditions for surrender. Now, I'm a Capricorn moon, but believe me, I've spent most of my life looking at what are these techniques we can use for surrender. Well, if there was a technique for surrender, it would not be surrender. So it
Surrender.
requires something so overwhelming that at its worst it would be considered to be like the dark night of the soul. But then again, people like Gene Houston will say, well, that's a good thing. The dark night doesn't happen until the seventh of eight stages of the spiritual process, so it
Mm.
doesn't happen at the beginning, so to go through that at a certain point is important. I mean, we're not taught that in school, but I mean, that's an important stage. Then there's the Saturn ones. I mean, at 44, 45 is a really important Saturn thing. There's Saturn returns, there's other Saturn cycles. And that's where you can figure it out. Okay, I've been in this relationship for 15 years. I'm beating my head against the wall. I keep trying the same thing over and over and over again. And it's the same thing keeps happening. Well, Saturn maybe at that time is saying, change the game. If it's happened this way 7 times in a row, well, maybe why are you doing it an eighth time? Like go a different direction. So you can objectively figure it out, even if you don't like what the objective reality might say. This is the time to change the game. So those are middle world kinds of things. And then Uranus, right now, a lot of people. I mean, there's a cycle happening right now with Jupiter and Uranus together in Taurus for the first time in 83 years in Taurus, and it's not since 1941. This is more like unexpected synchronistic events that blast you into other worlds, not into the underworld, but it's something that is designed to move the assemblage point, to move a person beyond the center of what had held them together up to that point, and it's taking them into other altered states, I guess you could say. Yeah.
I did a ceremony on the day of the transit. Very, very intense and very fascinating, and we'll see what transpires. But I mean, I've personally been feeling very different since then. What was it, April 24th? A month ago, maybe? We'll see. But I can completely relate to what you're saying about these, kind of the dark nights of the soul or the initiatory processes, whether it's Saturn or,
Hmm.
surrendering to Pluto. But it's been fascinating to meet so many people who try to avoid it
Right.
or numb it or run from it. And I'm wondering, as a collective on Earth, it seems like a lot of people don't want to go into the dark nights or the initiations.
Hmm.
There's a lot of the avoidance and everybody's trying to feel better. Everybody's, now it's whether it's antidepressants or, alcohol or some kind of numbing agent, media, social media, maybe
Yeah.
now it's psychedelics, but I'm wondering, do you feel like there's something here like that is naturally going to start occurring for a lot of humanity as we're in this density of the Kali Yuga? Like, I mean, where do you see things going? I mean, there's the Uranus and Taurus. We're coming into election here in America. There's multiple world wars happening. I mean,
Right.
like, where do you think this is all going according to astrology, and then also like humans in this kind of collective
Well, I mean,
experience we're all
in
in?
general, among the greater proportion of the population, there's, due to technologies and internet and social media and metaverse and all the rest of that, there tends to be an avoidance to go in. Everything is like spectacle on the outside, and it's absolutely essential to remember to go in. I mean, that the universe, the journey of awakening happens there, not not in the external spectacle. Um, but in answer to your question, I've been watching this now since actually the late 60s. There's a variety of times where you have a timeline split. And one of them actually I directly experienced at the end of 1968, early 1969. There was a really remarkable timeline split that happened at that point. And then one happened in early 2022, and I wrote about this, that I think that the time period of April through around, well, the time period we're talking now is another timeline split, and the timeline split is the point, different opportunities of people to make a choice. Am I going to choose to remain human, or am I going to just go along with what everybody else is doing, or what is called progress? Like the inevitability of becoming cyborgs, or the inevitability of becoming AI, and all the rest of that. So the choices are being made, and so therefore, I'll just share with you, like, I did not travel for a number of years, just not wanting to go along with what the agenda was saying that you needed to do. But then I started again last year, because the essence of our school is in-person gatherings, in circle, hugging, connecting, being personal, and the whole thing. And so we started doing that again in last year. And we had two great gatherings last year, and we already had the one in Ohio. And I felt like I was already living in a different timeline, because the only time I ever was engaged with, the collective spell was when I went to the airports. The rest of the
Airports are the
time,
worst.
I was around people who were kind of like all in the same place. So it's how that's going to actually happen over the next few years. If you read this book, The Yuga Shift, and it corresponds actually with Steiner's work, which is that their view is that basically for the world to be, the earth may have to die to be resurrected, is a way to put it. And this is what's happened before in history. There's a story that made a lot of sense to me. It comes from India. I heard it from one of the teachers out there, that it has to do with Shiva and Shakti. It's one of the versions. There's a lot of different versions of Shiva and Shakti, but this one story is that Shakti represents the Earth Mother, represents the goddess, represents the living Earth, the Anima Mundi, the soul of the Earth, and her livingness. All right, and then Shiva is both creator and destroyer, and so they have a deal with each other. And Shakti says to Shiva, if I cannot really be healthy and be myself, then our deal is that's when you turn it over. that's when you will, right. Whether it's in the past, it might be deluge, and other times in the past it was some kind of conflagration. I keep getting a feeling, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, that it's solar events that are going to be responsible. I hope. Some of the people I follow, it's like, I hope the sun does something to wipe out the satellite grid. I didn't vote to basically have my air of sky and filled with, you can't even see the stars in some places now because of the satellite grid. So something needs to happen. I guess you could say divine intervention, but then there's the other way of looking at it that would say that if only 3% of any given population is awake, civil disobedience, non-compliance, well then, that changes it. It doesn't. Those kind of revolutions have always worked better than violent ones.
Yeah. That's an interesting one that I keep wondering about. I've asked a few people this on the podcast over the years about, there's now more and more people discussing even, astrology. There's more people coming to the world of psychedelics and sacred medicines. There's more people
Yes.
meditating. It seems like there is this global awakening, even though it sometimes doesn't look like it if we are looking at the news or social media. And that's where I have hope, where I'm like, well, maybe this is here for a reason. And at least I know you're in the Philippines, but at least here in America and some other countries, Australia, I don't know how it is there, but yeah, there's more and more people microdosing. The everyday average person's trying to get off of, I mean, not everybody, let's get that straight, but maybe move their diet to a more healthy diet, get off of certain meds. I feel like more and more people are awakening, and I'm wondering, is this in the astrology to have psychedelics reach the masses? Is this part of, like, is this written in the stars that more and more people are interested in astrology? More and more people are, maybe hopefully caring about the earth a little bit more. Is there something in this writing and the written in the stars that is part of this journey?
It's an interesting question because, of course, back in my generation in the 60s, I don't know if you know about these stories, but people like Grace Slick, they go into the White House and they're going to dump LSD in the water, so there was this desire to, she was invited to the White House because of uh, her Ivy League background. They thought her old friends in college invited her, and so she's in the White House. And at the last moment, she was afraid to do it, but she had brought the stuff in to dose the White House. So we always had that view. In fact, Timothy Leary's view was on that too. I don't think so. I mean, I think in 2022 that was one of the timeline splits when the idea that we had in the 60s and which has come through many other times since then, which is the whole world will be transformed, that everybody wakes up. Maybe sometime every soul will have a chance to wake up, but I think at Kali Yuga we're looking at this as a school. And so basically those of us have an opportunity in Kali Yuga. This is what I was saying earlier, that individuals have a bit greater opportunity to really wake up in Kali Yuga. It doesn't happen in Sat Yuga because everybody, we could say, is awake. The timeline split idea is the thing which makes more sense to me. But how that operates, I think you can run into 100 different opinions on that. That the Earth splits in two. I've seen that version of it, or that basically individuals who are awake will go through some kind of death, and then they are waiting off in the astral, or in the higher astral, and waiting till the earth is cleansed, and then they come back down. I mean, there's even the biblical stuff has different versions of that. What I don't like about the biblical version is that their attitude is that, well, everything's fine. We don't have to do anything. When Jesus is coming, and we'll just get raptured. Which is not a whole lot different than the light polarized New Age. Which is that all you have to do is love and light everything. And no, then you're not paying attention to the middle world and the underworld and what's actually happening. Nariah, who you've connected with, she uses, we have different expressions for this. I'm sure you've heard most of them, like spiritual bypass. But what she came up with is light washing.
That's a great one.
Yeah, yeah. Or light polarization. Those kind of things. More light you do, then it just causes the dark is there. I mean, you have to have both. I mean. The goal, Jung was aware of that back in all through the 20th century. I'd say I don't have any, I just know what's happened before. I know what the intention is of these different cycles. I know what the intention is of the U.S. chart cycles. I mean, I've certainly been writing
I was just going to ask you about the U.S. chart. Yes, because you are I have sent so many people your videos on the U.S. chart over the years. I think you're probably one of the top experts on analyzing the U.S. astrological birth chart, maybe in addition to Rujar. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's because I follow you and not many other people, but can you talk a little bit about that? What do you believe is happening in the U.S. over the next, few years, other than we have this huge election coming up? And I mean, what's written in the chart for the U.S.?
Well, there's the original idealism of the founders, and actually there, there's a lot of people write about, the evil Masonic lodge and whatever. But there were two different branches of the Masonic societies at that time. There was the European version, which was the Illuminati, and then there was the American version. Um, Take away, of course, all the stuff you could be critical of the founders. They had slaves, and they were a white elite, but still, what they put in that document is what were Aquarian and Sagittarian values. I mean, they were values that were really pretty good in a lot of ways. But if you look at the U.S. chart, built into the U.S. chart are three shadow expressions. And even though the so-called founding fathers warned against a two-party system, they said if there was ever a two-party system in the United States, it's doomed. Not to speak of it's in the chart. I mean, that Mars and Gemini squared by Neptune. I mean, it couldn't get out of it. So it's just like back and forth. Red, marching on the right is now marching on the left, and it's back and forth. And so, who's the white hats, who's the black hats, whatever. That's a problem. Then the second shadow of the chart, I mentioned the first one, which is a sellout of the idealism. But the third one is the Cancer part of it, the chart, and it's the shadow of that. It's an underworld. 3-4 planets in Cancer, Venus in the underworld, and so basically it's the situation. What I mean by that, if you go around the rest of the world, I mean, it's more easy to see the shadow of this, which is this whole thing about American exceptionalism, or we're the good guys, we're number one, and so many people in the U.S. don't even care about what's happening around the rest of the world, So there's a certain kind of provincialism or clanism that is the shadow of the sign of Cancer, as opposed to what Cancer can be, which is global family, which is that why should you not be concerned about other children as much as you are concerned about your own children? So we've actually revised our view of many of the signs in that way. What is the purpose of the mystery school, the sign? But the U.S. chart, anyway, so all the shadow in the U.S. chart. And so the U.S. is in a Pluto return and a Chiron return. So basically that's like I'm not the only one who would say this. I mean, Jung said that for the entire Western, quote, civilization. If they don't address their shadow, then basically there's no way it can continue. The addressing of the shadow of the American hegemony, of its the colonialism, the raping of the earth of its resources in order having the biggest military on the planet. It's all symptoms of Kali Yuga also, So the jig is up. I mean, basically, a lot of these things of the shadow of the U.S. chart are going to be composted. I mean, whichever way that compost is the word we use for Pluto. Composting. And out of compost comes new life. So I mean, that's just a very short summary of it. But this year is just hugely important. And as far as whether or not there's an awakening that happens in the chart of the United States. I keep writing about here's a possibility, here's the time period where, we could address it. However, unfortunately, if you're just looking at who's running the American government, I mean, they certainly don't represent the majority of the people of the United States. But unfortunately, the people of the United States are still buying into this false dichotomy, being on the outside, and being an expat and watching it from other parts of the world. It gives me a different perspective. Also, I was in a military family, so we lived in other countries. I lived in Thailand when I was in high school, and lived in Germany. I'm basically just traveling most of my life. So anyway,
incredible. I'm just curious, have you looked at the transits that are happening for the U.S. during, or looked at the charts of our presidents during the election, like our candidates? Like, have you analyzed all that yet? Probably.
To a certain extent, yeah. I'm actually what I have as another platform is that I do uncensored podcasts on the Unite platform. Sarah G's Unite platform. And so I've done a series of 14 or 15 on there where we look at the charts of, I did a series of 2 or 3 on the whole thing that happened in Lahaina. And
Wow.
looking at the charts of the billionaires that have been allocated to the different Hawaiian islands. The Peter Thiels, the Jeff Bezoses, the Oprah Winfreys, the whole host of them that the guy that owns the billionaire who owns Lanai, Zuckerberg on Kauai, and it's really remarkable to see how they've destroyed the Hawaiian Islands.
Oh my God. Wow. I'm curious, as people are, let's say, working with their astrological chart to find their purpose, how much of it is a blueprint for your purpose versus free will? Like where does that work in? Like, let's say it's written in the chart and, but they don't do anything with it. Or, I mean, what then happens? It's just like, okay, well, now you're just going to be less aligned and less happy and living a lie and, having no meaning and purpose. And like, where does free will come in when it comes to astrology and transits and what, cycles even?
Right. I just love the questions you're asking. Jung was once asked, what is free will? And he says, free will means to gladly do what you must do, which is a marvelous synthesis of the two things. Or I could put it a slightly different way. There's something in the Christian Bible that says many are called and few are chosen. I've rewritten that to say many are called, but only some agree. So the thing about human beings is they can choose to be their full selves or not. And that's one of what makes me continually fascinated every time I do a chart, because there's an element of it we don't really know what cycle a person will be in where they may choose to align with their life purpose themes or not. Now, Ridjar felt that it was important not to be too, pie in the sky about it, but to be realistic about where a person's at. People can be going through just really, really remarkably difficult things. But at the same time, he felt it was always important to tell a person, even if whether they're ready to hear it or not, what their purpose is. And I've had people sometimes, I just found this from 15 years ago, this old cassette tape, and oh my God, I just listened to it. Now I know what you were talking about, so you can't know for sure when that kind of thing is going to happening, but I think it is somehow our responsibility to look at each individual as having the capacity to fulfill their dharma. Ridjar said something really incredible. He said that if you do not fulfill your dharma, then there's a hole in the universe left where you were intended to be.
That's a beautiful, beautiful statement. Yeah.
So that's the best way I can answer your question. So
Yeah.
there is a combination of free will, and so basically free will is what allows you to either to fully choose to be who you are or not, to go along with the consensus reality spell, or to do what you need to do in order to fulfill your life purpose. And what we're trying to do is to give people tools for how they can do that. Part of it is connecting with other people who are awake. I mean, this you can't do this in isolation. And as you know, the work you're doing with individuals and supporting them, and that's what we're trying to do. I do not often actually talk often with people who are already made their decisions, as it were. I don't know if you've noticed this, that there's certain people that no matter what information you give them, like whatever you share with them, it's just they can't even see it.
Yeah.
And I always have to remember that as far as what I know and what I can share with an individual, it's better that they ask. I don't want to try to impose anything on anyone, you know. I mean, so if someone is interested and wants to know more, and I think the same thing in your own work.
Yeah.
Uh, it's also like the whole psychedelic world. There's an ayahuasca center down in Peru that I have worked with that are now not accepting Americans or Europeans to come down and do it because so they've corrupted the medicine. They're just coming down in order to have a good time, you know. So they're not using it as an initiatory, you know, spiritual opening, you know. And but that happened back in my generation also, you know. It's like certain things become party drugs rather than being something that is designed for spiritual initiation.
Yeah. I have a question that's, and yeah, I agree completely. And by the way, I'm like, ayahuasca's not really that fun. That's where when I hear people like taking it lightly, I'm like, there's some other drugs that you could take lightly that are a lot easier. Just
Yes,
go do
indeed.
MDMA or
Yeah,
something.
exactly.
But
Right.
I'm curious, when you had that experience in your vision quest happen back in Mount Shasta, I'm curious, I'm sure you went back and looked, but what transits were happening or what were you in astrologically that, catalyzed that in addition to the power of a vision quest, which by the way, I had my own first vision quest a few years ago and it's amazing to watch it now unfold like right now in my life, just like opening up on its own. It's one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had. But I'm curious, yeah, were there any particular transits that made it make more sense?
Yeah, you know, I'm glad you asked me that because when I was talking about different initiatory processes, I talked about Saturn and Uranus and Neptune and Pluto. But what was happening for me at that time was a Jupiter return. And Jupiter returns happen about every 12 years, 11 to 12, 23 to 24, 35 to 36, 47 to 48, 59 to 60. I just actually recently went through my sixth Jupiter return. And depending on your Jupiter, so that is the cycle of a wave coming in. You can catch the wave, and it's taking you to a higher octave of your Dharma. And I like, for example, have Jupiter in Sagittarius. And when I was in my second Jupiter return, that's when I actually was totally gung ho, 100% all in one of these Eastern meditation organizations. I was in the inner circle in the Transcendental Meditation Organization. Now, I blew out of that rather quickly when I discovered the shadow of that organization. But it was the third Jupiter return, which just took me to shamanism and earth sky mysteries and vision quest stuff and all of that. And so each 12-year cycle is kind of like, you know, the next wave. It's somewhat similar to if you can compare these four these outer planet initiatory processes. You can compare them to the stages of birthing. You know, where like there's a certain stage which is like you're in the womb, and it can be a toxic womb or a healthy womb. Then there's the time period where that's Neptune. The water breaks and you're in this oh God, no way out, fight to get out, you know. And depending on how difficult the Saturn cycle complexes on your chart are, it could be hard to get out. It might take you weeks, or you can get out very quickly. Then you go down the birth canal, and that's more like oh, new tastes and smells and colors, and you can't go back, but it's chaotic and out of control, and that's more like Uranus and Pluto. And then you come out, take your first breath, Jupiter. All things are again possible, you know. So it's a renewal of vision that happens at that point, you know. So I always say when
Wow.
I do a session for somebody, if they're in a Jupiter cycle, I don't mean just Jupiter returns, but Jupiter North Node, or you know, Jupiter on your ascendant, or you know, these kind of things. That's yeah, perfect time. You know, what is your favorite way of accessing higher vision? What can take you to the edge where you can be open to receiving instructions? You know, so that's Jupiter.
That's funny because I must be finishing mine up now or going through it still or something. But That would make sense because you said, I mean, I hate to age myself publicly because no one knows how old I am or
Well,
how
no,
young I am.
I'll just jot something down here. Don't worry. Um, well, like what I can absolutely know for sure.
Susan did my transit reading recently. So I do know about some of my upcoming transits, including a hard one when I'm in Peru.
Well, there's certain cycles that happen to everybody at around the same age,
Yeah.
and it's the Chiron return process.
Yeah. That's
Mhm.
starting soon. But I'm
Yeah,
40.
I'll have that information once you gave me your data, but I'll look that up.
Yeah. Now
But
I'm like, I want to look
there's
it up.
this Jupiter return is between 47 and 48, but then you also could have Jupiter on your ascendant. You could have Jupiter on Venus. There could be some other Jupiter thing taking place. So, um, uh, without seeing your whole chart here, I mean, I can only just place you along the timeline, and then in about a year and a half is the point in most either whether it's in Western esoteric traditions and it's also in Mesoamerican and the southern part of America. The traditions there, that's where you enter into the Council of Elders. So basically, this whole thing happens. The thing you're in now happens before that. So it's kind of a way of digesting what your life experience has been up to this time period, and where you will incorporate your mm, sacred wounds or fracture points, and then it becomes the healing elixir for what you get to share with other people as an elder. Yeah.
Isn't that beautiful? Wow.
Mhm.
If only the world could look at entering into the elder years in that beautiful way, like the initiatory way of, hey, you have all this medicine. Now
Mhm.
you can give it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is a beautiful perspective. I love hearing it because I still have a hard time even coming to terms with the upcoming Chiron return.
Mhm.
It's I've heard rumors about it and then the age thing, and it's like, oh my God, but nothing to be
It's
afraid of.
no, it's such an important cycle because it has to do with when a person reaches that point where whatever it is that happened to you, whether you were a survivor, whether you had absolutely perfect upbringing, or whether you had really difficult experiences, or just uh, you know 100 different peak experiences, or whatever it is you've had in your life, it kind of all evens out. You made it. So therefore, going forward, it's like it's a reset point. Where you made it, and just as you would know, people that have had really difficult lives can be can end up being really saints. Really phenomenal individuals. And then there are people who seem to have had everything going for them, and they don't turn out so well. I mean, it's every story is different. But what happens in this cycle is you're able to digest the whole thing, and then you come out the other side, and then there's a reset, and you're an elder. The
Beautiful.
only people that have really dangerous things happening in this cycle are if they haven't been honest about what their fracture points are. I'm a workaholic and I'm going to keep being a workaholic and I don't care. And so then there can be repercussions. That's just one example, but
Yeah.
whatever it might be.
Heart attack. No.
Mhm.
Kidding.
But no. But the point
Yeah.
I'm making is this: it's generally not the time period where a person physically dies. It's usually the time period where there's circumstances that happen to get our attention.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Mhm.
Well, I'll let you know what happens.
Yeah, I would love to
Hopefully,
know. Hmm.
hopefully I've been through enough in the last couple years that my God, I just had one of the biggest initiatory periods in my life the last like year and three quarters, year and a half. And it was great now that I'm out of it, but it was very challenging in it.
Hmm.
But all growth. And, when you're in it, and this is what you talk about as well, it's like at least I knew I was in it and I was able to consciously work with it,
Hmm.
versus avoid or complain or play victim. It was like, okay, this is happening and I know that there's an end to it and there's something on the other side. And I've already been witnessing what's on the other side. So
Right. Right.
This
Exactly.
is why I
No,
wanted to
no,
bring you on.
well, I'll be very curious to look up your chart after this, after our conversation. It's been quite a pleasure sharing this with you. You've asked really great questions, and I'm
Oh,
glad to have been able to share it with you.
thank you. And I want to leave you a moment to share about, what you have coming up in the school. I know you offer, classes, workshops, summits. I've attended a bunch of things over the years. And by the way, I always describe your school as they were the people that did a summit on preparing for 2020 back in 2017 or 18.
2017.
And I remember paying attention to it and like, oh, because it was I had read about
Mm-hmm.
potentially what might happen, and it's just fascinating. So, do you have anything coming up over the next few months, and what's going to happen for the school over the next year or two?
Well, the only event we have is this gathering we have at Callanish and it's on the island of Lewis for the lunar standstill. I'm sure it's beyond the scope of our time here to go into all of the things about the lunar standstill, but we have a gathering of about 25 or 30 people there at this boutique hotel near the Stones, and so we have a week-long gathering there. We have room for one more person there. Actually, one room still available. The best way to stay in touch with what's happening in our school is by going to the Turning of the Ages website. And I have there's a place there. There's one of the buttons at the top is Founders Corner, and I write stuff every week, and all my writings are there. And I do a monthly video blog, and then we do regular seminars at the equinoxes and the solstices, as well as a free thing I do at the cross quarters, which are representing different aspects of our school, because it's not just astrology. So we have like a whole orientation toward core shamanism. We have an orientation toward just basically astrology and divination. We have one of the quadrants, one of the branches of the school, which is associated with counseling and how these techniques can be used by coaches, psychologists, and so on. And then we have a fourth branch, which is the spiritual and philosophical foundations of this work. So all those things are there on the site. A person can see how they can be connected to all those things. I just did, I was mentioning to you before we started, I did a podcast, not a podcast, a video blog just the other day on this the Yuga shift. Going into the timelines of history and what's actually, according to this material, is that actually the very end of the Kali Yuga is March of next year, and that corresponds to so many other timelines, including even the fourth turning, which is non-astrological, but it's a way of looking at U.S. and European history of the rising and falling of different generations. All of it converges actually in this year, next year, not to speak of everything that's happening on the U.S. chart.
Fascinating.
So that's
I
the
love
best.
these
And then
times that we
also
live in.
sign up for our newsletter. If people go
Yeah.
to the website, we put out a newsletter. We just had one came out today. Every new moon and every full moon, we put out a free newsletter that has a lot of the videos and other stuff on it. And then obviously we're always loving people to be members of our school. We're
Yeah.
just supported by our membership.
I think I'm a member. I signed up for something that I know. I mean, I'm pretty sure I am. I'm something. I've done a bunch of things. The summit, the Venus class. I think I'm a member. I don't know. If not, I'll become a member again.
I
But
hope you are.
I know. I hope so.
You're definitely part of. You're a seed person for certain.
Well, I figure, anyone that reads content from any, even because I've subscribed to your newsletter for, since at least 2017 or so, to me, it's like if people are reading content, watching your YouTube videos, learning, it's like it's not that much money to give back, So we'll put the links in all the show notes, and I can't recommend this enough. I've, told so many people about your work, and I'm very honored to have a couple friends that have studied under you, and one of them to actually work with me sometimes, as she's my astrologer, one of my astrologers. So
Mhm.
I am really honored. And thank you so much for getting up early and doing this talk together with me today. I appreciate
My
it.
great pleasure. Yeah, and also
Wow.
that we were offering a free gift.
Oh,
Who wants,
yeah.
which is free 3 months of membership.
Yes. We will get that link. Join the programming, the school for 3 months for free. Awesome. I really appreciate that free gift. Thank you so much for your time, Daniel. It was so
Well,
great to finally meet you.
thank you.